Alright guys, HyDra here again today. Hope you're doing well and enjoying your day so far. A fascinating first day of the second weekend of Major 4 qualifiers. OpTic make their debut with MercuLes. The result not exactly as planned, but in many respects, today may be massive for the future of OpTic as a franchise. A serious star could be on their hands. A massive result to close out the day though as well. FaZe falling short. That makes this World Championship race very interesting indeed. Lots to say about the series of the day. Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. All that good stuff as always. Let's crack straight on because we're going to talk Falcons versus Heretics. There was some questionable COD, I would say, getting played this series. I mean, this moment kind of blew my mind. Falcons had the opportunity for a comeback. Priest, I don't really know why Priest ran it this way. Like, I know that it wasn't just Priest's fault exactly. And to be fair, Falcons did pretty well to even stay in the game. But look, they were coming from front. Priest just runs out to try and hit the flank on number 2. Rayella dies. The setup collapses, and eventually they go on to lose the game. They did also lose the Search and Destroy, and this proved pretty decisive in the end. It was an interesting game of Search. Again, I think there were certainly moments this series, like, I think Xnid, I know that he didn't have the best final map of the series here, but I do think watching the gameplay, that Xnid probably is their best player right now. Like, I don't really know what Pred was doing here in the Search. There were a couple of rounds on this. I mean, he sits in the corner, he gets the knife out and just dies. I know that he was, you know, tagged up and weak anyway, so he really had nothing he could do about it. But you know what I'm saying, right? There are a few rounds there where, you know, Pred wasn't necessarily being the most impactful. And I think with the team the way that it is, look, Pred's decision-making this year, in my opinion, from start to finish, I think the break definitely affected him, right? Like, he, for various reasons, you know, being unable to play and not being at the level that he wanted to be at. I mean, when we were on OpTic, you know, there were many questions I had on what he was doing on the map a lot of the time. And I still maintain those questions, to be fair, today with Falcons. And look, Heretics are a good team. Falcons won the control, Vault control, that's their bread and butter. They won it. But then in the end, they lose the final map. It was a pretty close series, right? I mean, just like a couple of things, if they'd have gone different ways, could have been a different tide. But to be fair, this final map was a rough one for the main AR of the Falcons. And that being Arcetes, right? Because when Super's got 32, Wrinkle's got 40, you know, you're going to need the ARs to shoot back on the other side. Pred had 45 this map, but Arcetes was 16 and 34. Rough way to close out the series. Falcons go down. Look, at this point in the year, they are just playing spoiler, but it is still very relevant for the Falcons because they're not going to be at champs, sure, but they want to qualify if they can with a good seed for Major 4. The problem is that Falcons' next 2 games after Heretics are Thieves and FaZe. So, yeah, good luck with that, I guess. But of course, the World Cup is on the horizon as well. They're not going to want to just turn up with a team that's going to get top 12 or even top 16 with the Challenger teams that are there as well. So, you know, this team, they're better than when they had the full Saudi thing, sure. But they're not good enough, probably, to justify keeping this team around in full. And that, I think, is the big question, really. If, you know, let's say after Major 4, before the World Championship, which they won't be at, you know, they might need to consider something. And I think there's an argument to say that Falcons could have at least tried to get this man into their team when they had the chance over the last couple of days. Probably it would never have happened because OpTic got him. He was, you know, with MercuLes got the OpTic offer. He wasn't going to choose anything else. But let's get into the series because this was really fascinating against Boston today. Boston got slammed last week by Ravens, and OpTic play Ravens tomorrow. And that is now a critical series when it comes to the World Championship, as we shall get into here in the coming minutes. Boston played a pretty good game 1, but I will say that, look, MercuLes didn't have the best map 1 here, but I will say his comms were honestly really good. Like, that's what was surprising to me, really, right? We talked about the fact that this exact team, Shotzzy, Dashy, Huke, that exact team of 3 played with Ghosty back in MW2 when all the Scump, Dashy, whatever drama happens that year. They couldn't get Preds, they got Huke. You guys know the story. That year, they brought in the same type of team, but Ghosty came in, and Ghosty was an excellent piece because of his comms and his leadership and his in-game leadership and stuff like this anyway. I wasn't really expecting Merc to be that guy, and look, he's not quite a Ghosty, but I will say, like, his comms in terms of, you know, where they're spawning, what's happening on the map, were arguably better and more in tune than the veterans on his team, right? Which was, you know, good and bad, right? Like, it's great that MercuLes seems to be an incredibly well-rounded asset in every domain. But, like, the question for many OpTic fans today was like, well, hang on a second, could like somebody else have stepped up maybe? Because Huke had a good game one, but again, there were some, you know, questionable decisions, let's say, going down on the OpTic side. Boston eventually, they get the map win, and then OpTic versus Boston, they played the search and destroy. And again, it was a pretty similar story, right? MercuLes was having some banger rounds, but the mid-rounding wasn't ideal, and OpTic eventually find themselves massively on the back foot, and they end up going down 2-0 in the series. So, you know, fair play to Boston. I mean, this was a round as well. MercuLes gets the first blood, Purge trades it out, and then I think Shotzzy dies like immediately afterwards here, which, or maybe it was, yeah, was it? Yeah, I think Shotzzy gets gunned by Snoopy immediately afterwards or something. So, yeah, it wasn't ideal, really, and OpTic eventually go on to lose this map. They did make it kind of interesting, but in the end Boston took it, and we were thinking, okay, well, here we go, it's the same old story that we had at the major. But then MercuLes basically single-handedly took over the series, and this is what was so impressive, right? Look, the outcome of this series is not ideal for OpTic. They would have liked the 10 points, especially because Boston winning today effectively guarantees that Boston will end the season above OpTic. It's not guaranteed, but you know, Boston were at 180, OpTic were at 155. A win would have brought OpTic within 15 points. The gap is now 35 points, which is pretty substantial from now to the end of Major 4, of course, unless OpTic were to, let's say, win the entire thing. But Boston have been good this season. They've stuck it out. Look, Boston are top 6. That's like, that's what they do, right? They come to the major. They're like a gatekeep team. It is what it is. If you can beat Boston, you can probably go further, but Boston will generally beat the teams that they should, and this OpTic team struggled against them big time back in the major in Miami. But MercuLes just took over the series, right? I mean, he took over this map effectively. He had a phenomenal control here on the Hacienda. And then, you know, they won it pretty emphatically. Dashy was 25 and 16. So it wasn't just Merc had a great map here. Of course, the scoreboard is bugged as always. But yeah, in the end, that was a big takeover. And it was the same thing on the next map. This was honestly even more impressive because his movements, like everything here, and the MercuLes is just such a great flex because he can run both guns. Like, it just makes so much sense. He can use the Jackal, he can switch to the aims, like whatever you want to do. And like, he was just going on an absolute rampage. I mean, his movement as well on this rewind hardpoint I thought was super impressive. And I know that everyone was watching this thinking, well, can we get this man some help? And that was the remarkable discussion that resulted from this series. I think many were wondering, well, you know, MercuLes has gone from playing with a very well-drilled Toronto team, excellent communication and all this, to going to playing with clearly a pretty dysfunctional OpTic core so far this season. And therefore, people wondering, oh, maybe MercuLes is not going to get exposed, but maybe he's going to have a harder time, right? His numbers aren't going to be as good as when he was on Toronto. But actually, it was almost the opposite. Merc was thriving, and it was the rest of the team that was struggling to really always put the pieces together. So we had a great start to this map. I mean, this was probably my favourite play here of maybe the entire series, but when he completely finesses this hardpoint. I mean, he's already 12 and 3 at this point. That little slide there was disgusting. I mean, he was just playing with his food here, to be honest, but playing it absolutely perfectly. You know, the type of stuff you'd expect from a veteran player in their prime, I don't know, like rather than somebody who's just brand new to a team with the pressure on. Super impressive. I mean, MercuLes starts off 14 in 4. He actually ended the game 32 in 14. Effectively just destroyed Boston on his own. And it's like the rest of the team, sure, they deserve some credit as well. A little bit, but I think the decision making again, Shotzzy especially is probably the man now under the most pressure because Huke did pretty well. You know, Dashy was fine, MercuLes was the standout. But again, in terms of decision making and everything, Shotzzy's play has been called into question. But the general feeling of the community was, yeah, damn, MercuLes, this guy is legit. And Methods was saying the same thing. I don't think anyone is watching that series and denying that OpTic have made a good decision here. But the question is now, okay, you've got this very impressive, talented MercuLes. What are you going to do with him? Are you going to be able to win? This is a little smirk on Shotzzy's face, seemingly saying, damn, this guy's actually kind of good. Now, they went to a Game 5 Hacienda. We've seen OpTic play a Game 5 Hacienda before, and this time it doesn't go their way. Look, Search and Destroy was always going to be a bit of a problem. They've just been a team for a couple of days. You know, my prediction for this series, I thought OpTic could win it. I thought they probably would win it maybe in 4, but I thought if it went game 5, I was never going to favour OpTic just because new team, search and destroy always takes a bit of time. But they did go up 4-3, right? They had their chances. The next round, Shotzzy found himself in a 1 versus 2. There were maybe opportunities to have played this one better as a team anyway, but Shotzzy had a good map 5 after struggling in many of the respawn maps. But in the end, they won that map. Boston won the next rounds, and then they went on to take the entire thing. So, look, it was a close fought series. I mean, even this, right, MercuLes nearly had himself a 1v3, finds himself in a 1 versus 3, looks through the crackhead towards the site, gets the first kill, manages to get the second as well, and then falls down into the water, right? He gets the second kill here, and if he doesn't make the play to go to the water, maybe there's a chance he wins the round. But even that, like, he somehow nearly found a way to take it all the way through. As Hex says, I like what I saw, moving onwards from there. So, yeah, I think definitely Hex's decision, OpTic's decision, vindicated. But the question now falls to the rest of the guys. It's like, okay, you got MercuLes. He's pretty nice, as we know. But they still lost the series. And look, first series, I think will give them some benefit of the doubt. Losing 2 searches, the rewind was super impressive. I mean, here's MercuLes with his 32 in 14, just slam the other team. But in the end, losing both searches is pretty tough. Tomorrow's going to be very telling against the Ravens, especially when we consider what's currently happening with the CDL standings, because Cloud9 played FaZe. We know that FaZe's respawn has been shaky. Last week, though, they did look a lot better. I mean, they smoked Thieves, so it was definitely a feeling that FaZe would probably win. But let's not forget that Cloud9 have a lot to play for, and their team, undoubtedly from the first stretch was looking way better than they had done previously. Look, their team just straight up has more pace. In terms of online COD, to make it work online and get some upset wins, this is the type of team to build. Cap's still in there, great addition. Simp gets all 4, and they win the game 1. It was close. FaZe brought a comeback, but Kremp pops a nice little 3-piece at the end to go on a 5 spree. We know that Kremp versus Drazah is not a matchup that favours him historically. Cellium had 42 kills game 1 on the skyline as an AR, like absolute joke. Still, though, they lost the map. And again, the question in the, hard points and the respawns is on the tiny terrors, as kind of crazy as that is to say, but that is what we're looking at right now. Now, in the search and destroy, bit of a different story. Simp comes in, aces the first rounds, and they go on to win the map without too much difficulty there. But after that, I mean, this is where FaZe would always win. This is like what this current FaZe team that struggled at Major 3, yeah, they started out winning the qualifiers, but this is the same thing they would do before, where like this old FaZe, they would always win these controls. They would always win these controls. But they didn't. They went down in 5. Capstone made like an insane dive around the corner here as well when they eventually closed it out in 5. And was just, look, Cloud9 deserve a lot of credit, right? At the end of the day, they have more to play for than FaZe do on some level. So maybe it's expected that they're going to bring the absolute heat. But at the same time, FaZe definitely still reminiscent of what we saw from them back in the Major when it was certainly not exactly going to plan. So yeah, Cloud9, they get the job done. Capstone comes flying around the corner, guns down Cellium, and that pretty much spelled the end of the map. And then we go to another hard point where we know FaZe have been struggling. They bring a bit of a comeback, but immediately they're down 100 points. Kremp started off real strong, and there was just nothing that FaZe could do in the end. So the series concludes 3-1 to Cloud9 New York. Atlanta FaZe go down, and kind of a crazy series with, like, I mean, look at that, 0.92, 0.99, 8.3, 9.8, 9.8, 9.8, 1.2. But, I mean, I can't deny the fact that Simp has been very lackluster for the last, like, couple of months. He's had some pop-off series here and there, but the majority of the time, the Tiny Terrors, both of them, have just been surprisingly slow, let's say, in terms of their performances. Now, Cloud9, they've now made things real tasty because they were looking pretty good last weekends. They've had a whole week of practice. They're clearly bringing a lot of energy, and they've not got an easy run. I mean, like, they still have to play Heretics and Thieves in this stage, but this is a massive win. This might be a good enough win, potentially, to get them to the winners bracket as long as they do well enough. And they're now within 30 points of OpTic. So, look, I think OpTic should be fine. MercuLes looks like a good addition, but losing today and Cloud9 winning, given how we know that Rocker, a bottler, is probably not going to make it anyway, maybe Cloud9 are a team that actually could do it. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.